Okay, welcome back. So we want to hear from you about the groups, and we want to hear, we want to divide what it is that the feedback and insights that you have in two ways. So first, we would like you to speak about the process. How was the process of the dialogue in your group? Was there, do you feel that you were able to maintain your connection with wholeness? Was there was the dialogue something that allowed you to create something together, to go somewhere together, to learn together as a whole, or did you feel that you were, or what happened?
So,
and not what happened moment by moment, so and so spoke and so, but the nature of the process, the experience of the process.
Yeah, so we want to hear about both, about the process and what you talked about. But first, we would like to focus on the process itself. How did the process unfold in the group that you were in for half an hour? So if we could start there, and we also have the first hand raised. That's Ananda. Ananda, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just about to share about this in the group, but since that we came out of here, I'll just share it with all of you. Yes, it was I went into the breakout room with a whole list in my head of all these things that I can use in my future work that I've been learning here. And then we just ended up in silence and in a very listening state. And I just forgot all about that. And time to time, the awareness of the whole group of us, of what we are, almost 70 people, this presence there, the whole collectivity, it just popped into my presence from time to time. And sometimes when I got into my own talking, I forgot about that, but when at moments it came back again. But I was thinking that maybe this is the creative friction that was being talked about yesterday, that when all structures are taken away and just space is given for what is, it's actually the learning experience of that I am not so important, and what I have to say and what I have learned is not so important, at the point of what we're doing is not so important, but the being together, being in space, and just sensing of what is there is the actual point. Something like that. I hope you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, thank you, Ananda. I appreciate that. It allows me also to make a distinction that I find very important when we focus as a facilitator on the group, because we are experiencing the process of what's happening in the group of the 70 that we are right now, or the 5 that you have before. And basically, there are two things going on at the same time. There's my experience going on, and there's my experience of what's going on between us. And it helps a lot as a facilitator to distinguish both, because as a facilitator, more than anyone else, I hold a responsibility for what's going on in the group. And to the degree that I'm able to distinguish between that and what's going on in me, I'm able to be there for that, what's going on in the group. And so that's one reason, a muscle to cultivate, to make this distinction. This is going on in myself, and this is going on also in myself, but about what's going on between us. And allow this distinction so that I can see this belongs here and this belongs there, and that allows me to be more there for what is in the group, because if I mix it, my clear view of what's happening in the group is, let's say that way, it helps my clear view to see what's going on in the group as a whole.
Mm. And also, I think while the experience of being together is part of what we're emphasizing here, one can use that. I don't mean in an instrumental way, but that can become the ground of the work that you do. You know, if the work is doing creative brainstorming with others on a project, or doing creating a ceremony for the passing of someone's life, or doing a group process in like a more psychotherapeutic context, circling, that this undergirding it creates a very different depth and connectivity. And actually, to that point, we in many, often when we teach and when we do courses, the small groups get so connected with each other that we have some that have met for years without us, but just that they felt this connection with each other. And
we had no idea. After years, we had contact with someone. Oh, we are still meeting.
Yeah. But also, it's interesting because that's also a misperception of what is happening, that you think your group is so special because look what happened here. This was so amazing. And that's wonderful, but it's actually the ground is what's so amazing. The fact that we are not separate is mind-blowing. The potential that is that can come alive between us, and that we're just beginning to tap into. That's it's available with whoever is willing. But thank you.
Thank you.
Doreen, you have your hand raised. Doreen?
Sorry, I didn't realize that I was muted.
Okay,
okay.
I thank you for what you just said. That I found it a very valuable experience, and also looking at that almost, is it a failing to think, yes, one's group is special and you actually want to hold on to it? But what I found really interesting was, and this bears out what you were saying earlier, that it was so interesting to hear from the small exercise we did to start with, on request of one member of the group. I mean, we all requested it, went along with it, that yes, we would try this exercise to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And then noting everybody's individual experiences of that, and how some people found it separated them, and how others found that it brought us closer together as a group. And I found that such an interesting and enlightening thing. So that in creating these groups, obviously we all come with our own previous history. And so one particular technique, for want of a better word, is not going to work. But this ability just to be there and to bring your full humanness. And for me, I think it's really about bringing one's vulnerabilities,
Right.
And making them, being totally comfortable with them being there. I think that's part of creating the emptiness of the space for something to happen. And we don't have to define that. You know, we don't have to know what it is. We don't have to define it. It just is.
Great.
I appreciate that, Doreen, because what you're pointing to, and what it seems what you did in your group, is also this dance between multiplicity and unity. Because you need both parts for it to be alive. There's a kind of being together, but nobody's really visible. So to see each other also in our uniqueness is part of the wholeness and the aliveness. But then there is also how to hold this in the wholeness of a field together.
Mm.
And there are different ways how to go about it, and it seems that you danced with it.
Mm.
And I'm also sure there are different ways how to do that. But I find the point of most aliveness when both parts come together. The people are visible in their uniqueness, but it's not in a separating way. It feels it fuels the field,
Mm.
and there's awareness of the field as a whole. And that again is something how to work this, that it can come together in this richness, which I think is what the work is about.
Mm.
And it seems you did that.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, I felt it. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and also I think it's interesting because certain exercises in groups that ask, what is your experience right now?
Mm.
Or even that ask for introductions. I mean, my experience is often when we go around and do a round of introductions, many people take quite some time.
Mm.
You know, I mean, you can't do, no matter what, you can't fully introduce yourself in a 2-minute introduction or a 5-minute introduction. It's kind of whatever. But that often these things do emphasize the individual and pull us back into patterns of relating that are more individualistic. What we're trying to do in opening the field is finding a new way that our individuality can come forward, but in connectivity, not here I am and there you are, which is our habit. And so we tend to do things to really emphasize the other, but also the individual in the other, the way the individual lights up from this connectivity that is unique and is born out of different life experiences for each one of us. So I mean, it's in this dance, it's helpful to see what kinds of practices work to bring us back to our regular individuated self, and ones that emphasize our individuation within collectivity.
Thank you
And
for
again,
that. Yeah.
no, go ahead. And again, it's a question of style, but our finding is that it is a common mistake to emphasize in the beginning of a session too much, as Elizabeth said, on introducing oneself, because it's a very sensitive moment where you have to create coherence, and people coming from their own background and sometimes or quite often also kind of separated a feeling of being self, and then everyone bringing that in makes it more difficult to cohere first. So to introduce, but to hold it in a way that it does not emphasize just the uniqueness, but creates a coherence, is something that is again quite something to achieve, because you don't have so much time. Usually a Zoom session is an hour or so, and it happened quite often in meetings that 20 minutes people were just introducing themselves, or half an hour they were just introducing themselves, and how to do that in a way that we can come together, and we have to find different ways how to do this. But it is an issue to be aware of, that just make time for the coming together in this, also right away from the beginning.
And actually what we're talking about is diversity and integration, that as a facilitator to be aware of the process of coherence or integration and diversification, individuation or individuality or uniqueness, that there's a rhythm to that. And we're trying to create a context in which we have, because we are now so separated, where the integration now comes in so that the diversity can bloom in a different way. But I just wanted to point that out, that this is one of the topics that we wanted to go into today, about diversity and integration and being mindful of the two as a facilitator. Does anyone else want to share the process of your group.
I'll share.
Jen,
Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Because I think we had almost a classic example of what you're talking about. So we started off with silence, and I kind of people didn't want to push themselves forward, but then we did the kind of introduce myself. We talked about our thing, and then someone else talked about their thing, and then someone else talked about their thing. But then when we started to respond to what each other had said, there started a flow of conversation, of responding deeply to what someone else had said. So we entered the kind of we space, and then it was extremely pleasant flow and giving and receiving, which was lovely. So we kind of went through that awkwardness, and the silence was important, but in a way it was almost, maybe because we didn't want to be the first one to speak, we wanted to be respectful and what have you, but we still kind of came in with our own story first, but then we got into that lovely flow.
Right.
No, thank you, Jen. And also thank you for what you're pointing out, because that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the flow. In this situation, what my focus is, where's the flow starting to flow between us? And then we talked about yesterday about working with resonance, to create resonance with the flow, because when you kind of resonate to the flow, you bring it to the foreground of our awareness, and then the flow strengthens, and then people start to connect not with their separation more, but with the flow. And they can bring their uniqueness into the flow, but it's carried by the flow. And that's basically, from my point of view, when you win, or when the process wins, when whatever uniqueness is brought in in the current of the flow. And the current of the flow is carrying it, and we're together in carrying this flow. So the focus on that is what makes the difference, I find, to a big degree. So thank you for that.
Mario.
Yes, I'd like to continue, because I was in the same group, and I had a slightly different perception, because the silence at the beginning, I'm used to this kind of silence as a tuning in. So for me, that was already something that created a kind of coherence before we started speaking out about our individual situation. So I had the feeling it already was laying the ground afterwards. Apart from this, I had the same as you mentioned, Jen.
Actually, it's really interesting. And this, I'm wondering if I should even say this, but there's often in when you become more and more aware of the subtle dimension of the group, you may find that there are things that cohere in the group, or that things are starting to happen like a flow in the group, but you realize that the members of the group don't recognize it. And that's okay. And that it's because members of the group may be it may be in their own kind of partially in their own space. We all are, but that things become more powerful when we're all conscious of the same dimension. But someone may be distracted and something just happened, and they're kind of still with that, and yet there is something happening that is working for coherence at the same time. And it's to develop one's perception in that way, to be able to, within oneself and within the group, is part of the learning.
And to underline what you're saying, it is okay, because it's much better than if it would be the other way around, that there is a flow happening that people are aware of, but you as a facilitator are not aware of. So
otherwise you just shut up, right?
So if you are aware of something that maybe not everyone in the room, in the space, is aware of, I consider this also, that's your role, to be aware of it, and you serve the space when you are aware of more than every single one can be aware of, and then to bring that in, if you can do that, then you do a great job.
Great.
Ursula.
Yeah, we had a great experience, a lot of learning. And it started out super organically in a connectedness. Someone just said themselves where they're from and that they just had gotten up. So that already lowered the income threshold for everybody else. Yeah. Right. So wonderful. And then nobody had to facilitate it. The group hosted itself, and everybody did a super short where they are, which was fascinating because all corners of the world, really. And then another classic, then I think we did some sharing and responding to needs for facilitation or connected to the content. And then we fell into the trap of being fascinated by, oh, I hear this, can you explain more? And then something started a little side loop journey where maybe just two people were really feeding each other, learning from each other. And the rest of the group was maybe more bored. So it was important, but it was information. It was less sensing. But thank God, the group hosted itself well enough that someone else said, hey, do you see what's happening? I would like to come back to this. And then was towards the end of our time that we gelled again more together in like what has actually been the aim, the bigger aim here. Yeah. So it was a beautiful example of letting go, nobody really facilitating, like self-hosted, and still maybe of what you just said, Thomas, that not everybody realized what was the flow for the group as a whole, and some members getting more fascinated with some aspect of the conversation, which then took us out of the flow. And I was part of this contribution. But then the whole thing came back together. So to me, the learning is maybe to try and name what's happening and say, oh, can you see this flow and can we stay in this? So whoever is most awake in the group, in a way has the responsibility and shouldn't suppress that, but to come out and speak. And it was beautiful that someone said, hey, it's not what we should do, in a very good way. Yeah. So that I want to honor also that happened, that brought us back. And if we can cultivate this more in when we open a space to say, hey, we're all responsible. It's not the host, the facilitator. Let's carry this together. And if you see we're coming off or we are reaching it, can someone just name it that it's happening? And that, because that helps us to bring back into this very precious flow that I think we're all looking for in this.
That's very cool.
Great. That's great, Ursula. And I think that this is especially, this is great in any group, right? Even face to face, that you want the group to develop a capacity to self-regulate, to be able to see where fragmentation within the group is happening, to address things. And our aim as facilitators is to enable the whole to function. That may be appropriate in some cases and less appropriate in others. But I also, online, this self-regulation is really important, because so that people don't fall back into, sort of a passive observer mode. Like, oh, they're now talking and I'm out of it. But to realize we're all creating this space. Each of us brings our awareness, our intention, our consciousness to creating the space that we're all held by. And that if I care about that because it touches me, then I want to say, hey, you guys, I think you've gotten yourselves, it's maybe that's a conversation you can have afterwards, or it seems to be off the point of what we're trying to do right now. That can be that kind of self-regulation of the whole group is a powerful exercise that keeps us all, or that when we all feel that kind of responsibility, it keeps us all alive and in.
And again, it seems that you did a great job there, because I think one of the forms of doing a good facilitation is to know when to step back, to allow the self-regulation process to kick in. And that's really something, because you can over-facilitate very easily. And again, this way you create security, but the self-regulating forces, powers of the process get dampened this way. You don't bring them alive. So there's a skill to be aware when self-regulating forces are just appearing in the group, and to let them be, and just be there if something goes a little off, to be there for it, but not if not necessary, because then something starts where we are all together in this, and there's not someone facilitating a group, but there's a group facilitating, as you put it, oneself. And that's a very powerful experience, a very enlivening experience. And then there's also one thing that you also touched on, which I find important in a conversation, as a facilitator, as everyone, but particularly as a facilitator, to listen to where the conversation goes and what's opening up in the conversation, but to listen also to the silence. And with the silence, I don't mean the silence behind everything. I mean the silent corner of the conversation.
Who's not speaking?
Who's not speaking? And what is the not speaking speaking? Because the not speaking is a form of speaking. And if we are not aware of the speaking of the not speaking, we create a separation of the speaking part of the non-speaking part. And part of the role of a facilitator is to bring these parts together again. In a way that's not kind of, now you have to talk, or why you talk, just to find a good way, just to, if somebody doesn't want to talk, it's fine too, but to create openings, that there is not separation between talking and not talking happening. Yes, it's a natural dynamic. There's a sector in a group that tends to be speaking, and then a sector that gets silenced by that. And part of the facilitation is to create bridges that this separation does not take over.
I was like, one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gudrun, hi.
Hi. Good morning together. So I perceive that, or I wonder whether it is possible that we, as a large group, talk more with each other. So what I perceive is certain people share their ideas and perceptions, and always you both, Elizabeth and Thomas, are giving an answer, an appreciation, further explanation. So I would like to experiment with more flow in the group. But we are a big group, so perhaps it is not possible. And another question I have is when will we have a break this morning?
Mm-hmm. Actually, we're about to go to break. Mm-hmm. It's about time for the break. Yeah. Shall we do that? We were actually hoping that we can hold a conversation in the whole. Our invitation to have people engage in opening the space was an invitation to the whole to have a dialogue and opening together. So we're bringing that in and take the opportunity.
So we can go there and experiment there, and let's start with the break first.
Yeah.
If that's okay with you, Gudrun.
Is that all right? Okay. Good.
Okay.
So we have a half an hour break. Now we have a half an hour break. So we'll come back at let's say we'll come back on the hour, or in India the half hour. And yeah, again,